Okay, we're back. We're back for more, apparently. I couldn't have just 2 hours this morning being on stream, so I decided to do 2 more hours of continuous fun. And this morning we're continuing with our reactor workshop. Rebecca, how are you this morning?
I'm great. I mean, it's Monday, so still trying to get back into the swing of things, but doing okay. How are you?
I'm good. It feels like it's midday for me, and it's definitely midday for JP, who will be joining us in 2 seconds. But I'm excited to come back for module 4 of this workshop. We're doing well so
Yeah,
far.
and
Yeah.
thank you so much for continuing on with the series. We've been going strong, you know, fourth session, so moving along. If this is the first time you're joining us and you're coming from the reactor side of things,
Mm-hmm.
Christos and JP are part of the 425 show. They host it. They're Microsoft identity experts. They're identity all the time. And they've,
I like it.
I don't know
Identity
if
all the
you,
time.
and they have been kind enough to bless us with their presence on the reactor side of things and work through this Microsoft Learn module. So we are here once again for an hour and a half about of fun.
Indeed, indeed. I need to add a filter now for JP because filters because I don't have his chroma key, and he's going to say, "You're such an amateur, Chris. Such an amateur."
You're doing fine. You're great.
Right. And I fixed him as well, so we're all good. Okay. So module 4 today, we're going to be talking about APIs. We're going to be talking about securing APIs, and this whole workshop will go through that. And I'm really excited for that. So let's switch transition to this one. And we have JP as well. JP, how you doing, my friends? How was your morning?
It's a, it's okay. How are you?
As you can see, I'm all wired up. I don't know if I had too much coffee this morning, but as you can see, I'm still drinking it. And apparently I'm overly excited, as usual, for this. Oh, there you go. You know what, Karen? You need to, sorry, Rebecca, we need to hook you up with a 45 show mug like this one. It's unacceptable for you to come on our show and not have a proper 45 show mug. So
I'd love that.
we will definitely address that issue as soon as possible. So I hope everyone is ready to kick this into high gear and get started. The link is at the top. So if you go into docs.microsoft.com /learn /modules /identity secure custom API. That's the module we'll be looking today. I will put it on the chat as well because I don't know why I didn't think about this just now. And with that, we'll be able to you'll be able to follow along. If you haven't had the chance to follow along up until this point, just be aware that we have everything sitting on YouTube, and you can catch up on the previous versions of the workshop. It's all self-driven and self-paced. So even though it's nice to have you here on the stream with us to go through this, I think it's always easy to just go and grab it and do it yourself. And come to our Discord if you have any questions. We can help you by answering them and making sure that you don't have any issues blocking you. So are we ready to kick this off, JP? Rebecca, anything else before we head out to this adventure?
Good luck out there, guys. You'll do
Good
great.
luck out there. I like that. I like that.
I think we're good to go. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so
I'll stay on the chat.
absolutely, we would love to have you on the
Okay,
chat.
cool.
Thank you for helping us out, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. All right. Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Okay. Right, JP. Let's build some secure APIs, my friend. What say you? Right, let me see. I need to just bring this down a little bit so it doesn't block your beautiful shirt. There. Okay. So let's head out there. Today we'll be focusing on .NET. So everything we build today will be focused on .NET. There's no other technologies. It does say it requires some experience with ASP.NET Core at intermediate level. There will be quite a few bits of code that we'll need to copy paste. So again, we're not writing anything, but we'll try to cover things as we go. And hopefully JP can jump in with his infinite wisdom as we go through the process. And you can use Visual Studio Code or any other editor that you want. most of the stuff will be driven through the command line, so that's okay. And ideally, by now you have a Microsoft 365 developer tenant. If you don't have one, you can head out. Do you remember the URL, JP? Or do I need to check my ak.ms links? I got him off guard. ak.ms.
I think it's dev env.
Dev env. He's checking
Yeah,
out.
that gets you your free one. Yep.
Nice. So thank you, Bolt. On the ball, as always. What will I do without you? What is the difference between creating an API for use with ASP.NET versus Angular? Can a single REST service work for both? Yep. An API can be called by multiple front ends. In fact, as part of the workshop, we'll see how we can call it from an MVC app. And then we'll also use a console app to go and acquire some information, go and grab an access token so you can call the API. So you can have multiple front ends. It can be a mobile app, it can be a full-fat ASP.NET app, it can be an Angular single-page app, it can be a console app, anything in effect. The API doesn't have to change, the authentication components don't have to change with regards to who's calling the app itself. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so let's hit it up with introduction. I'm not going to read through that, but the whole point here is that API first design is very popular these days, especially since, as I said before, you could have multiple clients hitting your apps or APIs. So you just want to create one API that interacts and works with your backend data, your backend resources, and then front-end applications tend to be thinner, and the client apps will call your APIs from multiple endpoints. It can be, again, a mobile app written with Xcode and Swift or Kotlin or Java, whatever you prefer. It could be any web app. It can be Blazor, it can be ASP.NET, it can be single page app. And then you can have console applications, IoT processes and what have you, all calling the same API. And the whole point is that you only have to write the API once, and then the clients can be of all sorts of technologies. So that's the nice thing there. So let's get started creating a secure API to begin with. So the important thing here is in order for you to be able to start interacting with an API securely, your front end needs to be able to acquire an access token. Up until this point, we've talked about tokens and ID tokens because it was a case of getting users through the door. We wanted to securely authenticate users and get them through the door so we know who they are. But now with an API, we need to know what these users can do. So we talked about the who, now we need to know about what they can do. And for that to work, we need to be able to acquire an access token. That's the whole part of the OAuth 2 flows. We use OAuth 2 to go and acquire our access tokens to call resources. Those resources can be anything. It can be your own APIs that you have in the backend and you want users to securely access them. It can be Azure first-party APIs like Graph or Azure Storage or Cosmos DB or your SQL Server. You still need to acquire and authenticate using an access if you choose to go down that route. For example, for SQL, you can use other authentication modes like SQL logins, but we recommend against that, especially if you can secure everything via Azure AD. So for all these resources, you need to be able to acquire a token and based on the user's permission, go and call these services. Now we talked about the permission and consent framework on the previous module. So if you haven't done this, it's a great progression. So go back and have a look about how consent, how permissions work. Right now we're going to put them into action. So as you can see here on the diagram, you can have different kinds of flows. You can have user flows that directly acquire a token and call the APIs, but you can also have an on behalf of flow where your front end, users sign in on the front end, they acquire a token to go and speak to an API, but that API needs to call another API on behalf of that user. And that's another flow. So we have, they call them terminators. So you can see here, Humans or services can be using the app and then can have on behalf of or by themselves for the API flows, right? And again, you can have multiple tools or multiple clients calling into your APIs. So you can see a native or mobile app can do the same thing as a daemon service can do. They just use a different flow, and the browser can call an API. But that API could also be calling one or multiple APIs in the backend. So think about your, one of your APIs acting as a proxy or as a regulator or air traffic controller for accessing all sorts of data. It could be pulling data from Graph. It could be also pulling data from SQL Server, from Cosmos, from storage, from Key Vault. And they use all that information so you as a client, as a user, just had to say what kind of permissions you need and what kind of resources you need to access, and the API will take care of that for you via Azure AD. So we talked about terminators here. Then the next one is how to create, and it walks us through the steps here. So first and foremost, we definitely need an Azure Active Directory app registration that is specific to our API. So for that API, we need to create an app registration, but it doesn't have any authentication settings like we did before. Here, we just need to go and configure or expose an API. Since it is an API, it needs to expose an API. And in here, we configure our scopes. And scopes, in effect, are the permissions that we need to expose to that API. And there will be also, these scopes will be requested as part of the access token, and they will be propagated down to the access token that will be provided to the client. And you can have multiple scopes for the same API with different consent permissions. Like you can have admin only consent APIs, you can have user and admin consent scopes. And this is technically all you need to have a protected API. From a code perspective, the .NET CLI now allows us to create and bootstrap APIs with authentication, and it will have all the code necessary to allow us to build and run the API securely. So it will add the appropriate libraries. And in some scenarios, you'll see that it says to explicitly add certain libraries, but it is a little bit weird because it already does it for you. So I think at the time that this was being written, those NuGet packages were not part of the template. Now they are, so we don't have to explicitly add NuGet packages. And then it shows you how much code you need to write to wire up your API's authentication. Behind the scenes, the Microsoft.in.web is using MSAL, but it's built on top of MSAL, so it doesn't. You don't need to explicitly call MSAL in there. And we have added some helper methods to easily do some more complex operations. For example, verifying that the user has the right scope. So when the call comes from the front end, when the access token is passed, we not only want to validate that the token is correct and valid and hasn't expired, but we also need to make sure that the token that has been passed has the right scopes. And as you can see here, we turned the 25, 30 lines of code that we used to have in the past into a single line of code. So you just say what kind of scopes you expect to be present in the token that makes the call. And this one line of code will validate and make sure that everything is correct. If not, it will return a 403 back, and you don't have to handle that yourselves. So who's ready to write some code? We are, right? We all are. Continue. Okay, so first and foremost, we need to start with Azure Active Directory. So let me put this on one side. I didn't want to do that. I want to do this. And then on the other side, we'll do that. And it says, go and create a new app registration. Let's do that. Make sure you use your test tenant, because in some cases we'll need to have admin consent, and you know that this doesn't work for scenarios that you don't have admin permissions, right? So just reminding you that the developer tenant is ideal for these kind of scenarios. So first thing we need to do is just press the new registration at the top, and then it says provide a name. The name should be product category API. we don't have to do anything else here apart from making sure that it is a single tenant app. So accounts in this organizational tenant only. Make it bigger so everybody can see that. Apologies for that. And are we in Azure AD tenant or Azure AD B2C tenant? Right now, we're using Azure AD tenant. But stuff that we're showing you here should be available in Azure AD B2C as well. It's the exact same format, just different endpoints. Just something very, very important. On B2C, we do not support an on behalf of, which has been asked quite a bit. And although for this workshop, we're not doing an on behalf of flow, so we don't have an API calling another API. It is a very valid scenario in the real world. So just be aware that if you're using B2C, you can't have an on behalf of flow. So we have everything we need. We just need to press register. And then the next thing we need to do is go and expose our API. Now, the first thing you need to do is set an API. You can do it here by pressing the set button, or every time you try to add a scope, it will prompt you to save that. The nice thing here is that if you don't want to use a GUID, you can also have a nice, meaningful name, but we'll default to GUID for now, and we'll leave it as that. So save and continue. And then we need to add a few scopes. So the first one is product.read. So we'll type that there. And I'm going to use the lazy approach of copy pasting. And then it says who can consent, both admins and users. It's the easiest one. Then copy paste a few things. This is what you will get on the consent form. Remember, we saw that on the pop-up that comes up when you sign in for the first time. You need to consent to those permissions and those scopes, and it's important to be aware of that. So this messaging here, make it meaningful when you present that information to your users. If the solution is used by users, we'll see later on how a console is different. The console app is different. So we're adding that scope, and this is what it looks like. Now we have to repeat the same exact steps for two more scopes, the product.write and category.read. So let's go and add multiple scopes here. There. This one should also be admin and users. I want to say read product information, and let's just copy paste the whole thing in the other windows or the other text boxes. There you go, add the scope. We have a category.read. So let's make that available as well. Read category information. That's probably product category information. Yeah. Product category information. So there you go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we have to add one more scope, but this new scope, which is the category.write, needs to be available to admins only. So users cannot consent to that. An admin has to consent to this information. So let's do that as well. And so far we haven't written a single line of code, but the code will be the easy bit in my mind. So admins only, we're not going to change this one. Write product category information, which is good. There you go. Here, 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 and here. Enabled, add scope. We don't need to press save. That's all done for us. And this is all we have to do in our app registration to make things work. So next we need to create a .NET Core Web API application. And the easiest way to do that, if you are not using Visual Studio, is to use the .NET CLI. So let me open my terminal. Let me bring the terminal into focus. Let's change our directory to be the right one. No, I didn't want to. There, okay. There, okay. And now it says .NET Web, with a new Web API. The O is for the output, where we want the files to go when we spin that up. Why do you sometimes see the API : / / syntax for scopes, and other times I see a scope like HTTPS fabricam.com, on Microsoft.com, tasks, read. That's a good question. JP, thoughts?
The API syntax is, at least as of right now, not in B2C yet. So which is why B2C still uses the HTTP one. Largely, it doesn't really matter what you use. The V2 apps, newer apps, are going to use that API : whack syntax. You don't necessarily have to have a GUID in there. You could always use like a name that makes sense to you. There are some domain validation things that have to happen to make sure you don't use a domain name that somebody else is already using, like or one that you don't control. But it's generally just a versioning difference. So it's you'll always see B2C ones start HTTPS and then the name of the B2C directory, rather than the Microsoft ones, which might be a little bit different. But you can drive that in the apps manifest and in the app registrations page. You'll find something called identifier URIs, and that's the thing that pretty much sets that. And so you can really change it to be whatever you want it to be. But for now, the default is API : whack app ID GUID. So, yep.
Thank you very much. We got Daryl, we got quite a few friends. So keep the questions coming. If you have any questions, make sure to let us know on the stream as we go through. That's the whole point of doing this with you over here. And right, so at this point with this command, what we're doing is we're creating a new web API, a .NET ASP.NET API. I'm actually on .NET 5 right now, so it's .NET 5 web API. .NET 3.1, .NET Core 3.1 will also work. You don't have to have the latest. It will output all the files into the product catalog directory, which we'll create out of the through this command. And then for the dash AU or auth, if you do dash auth, we're selecting single org, so it will match the configuration of our app registration. Okay, so let's press enter on this one and see the magic happen. And with that, we now have our solution. So CD. So the next step, as you can see here, it says .NET add package Microsoft Identified Web. You do not have to do that because I will show you in a second why you don't have to do that. So CD product catalog, and then if we open this in code, you will notice that if we jump into the CSprods in the CSprods file, that Microsoft Identified Web is already there. There's no UI, so we don't have the .UI version here. This version is slightly behind as well, so yes, we want those assets to be added. If you're using code, let code drive, because we need to change some settings in the launch file. I think right now it's sitting at 1.8, so we probably need to update that version, but for now we don't need to touch that if you have any questions. But I think the template needs to be updated slightly. Okay, so we have our code ready. We have the command line on the side, so I can now just put this on the side and follow along. I'll close the windows there, and I hope that's visible to everyone. Maybe one click down. This should still be visible to you, I hope. Yeah, it should be okay. Right, now it says we need to, in the scaffolded project, we need to create, open it, delete the following files. Okay, let's go and delete. We don't need the weather forecast, which is right. We don't need the weather forecast. That's the default template. Yeah, move to recycle bin. And we don't need the class, the DTO for that, the model. Remove that. And then we need to make sure that we run on a different TCP port. That's because our API will be running alongside our ASP.NET web app, and because they're both going to try to bind to port 5000 and 5001, your apps are not going to work side by side. To allow us to do that, we're going to change the port that our API is running on. And to do that, you need to jump onto the VS Code launch.json file here, and we need to change we need to add an environmental variable. So grab that and paste it in here, comma, and down here we add the ASP.NET Core URLs. So now we should be running at port 5050 instead of 5001, which is the default for HTTPS. in the web API, it also says we need to remove the opening the browser. Indeed, because we're running an API, we don't need a browser here. So server action, remove that. I'm surprised that we have comments in our JSON file. It's not like it's YAML, right? Just to trigger my partner in crime there. Okay, so now we need to configure the web application with the Azure AD configuration. So let's find the app settings, which is the file here, and you'll see that we have placeholders for our configuration settings. So let me close this one. Actually, let me save this one first. Remember to save in VS Code because otherwise those settings won't persist or those changes. Okay, so now back to our portal, we need to grab some information. So from here, grab that there. Let me put my VS Code up again. Pin the side. So here we need to grab some information from the overview. So first we need the application ID or client ID, which goes here. We need the tenant ID, which is here. We need to change the qualified name. So for me, this is cmatskas dot on Microsoft.com. And in case you're wondering, that information is available at the very top up here. So that's my tenant name. That's where it's coming from. It's usually custom tenant name and then dot on Microsoft.com. So you can find it there. Okay. So we've done that. I think we need to go and create a client ID, a client secret, but let's not jump ahead. These three: request, authentication, and better validation. While the scaffolded mention is there. Okay, so now we need to add some data models. So we need to create a models folder back here. Well, let's save this one. Models folder. So at the root, models, and then in here we need to add category.cs. So copy that. Category.cs, and we'll paste our copied file along. There you go. Save. I'll close this one, and then we also need to create a product class or model. And this one is using the plain old API model. So here, product.cs. There, we add that as well. Make sure you save. And now we're going to add a new package called Bogus. So if you haven't used Bogus before, it's a fantastic library because it can auto-generate sample data for you, whether you want it for testing, like unit testing or integration testing or other reasons. Bogus, it's a fantastic library, and I'm glad we're using it here today. There are other libraries out there, so you don't have to use this one, but I'm just saying that it's a pretty nice package. So copy that back to our terminal, paste this, get the latest package down. Perfect. And we'll use that code now to auto-generate some sample data, right? Because we have products and we have categories, but we don't really have any data display. And what good is an API without some data? So first we need to go back into Visual Studio Code and create a new file at the root of the project. So make sure you're at the root and then create one called sample data.cs. And in there, we just need to copy paste that whole thing. Save this one. And just to go very quickly through the code for this, in case you have any questions. In effect, it provides two lists of categories and products, and then we use the initialize method to go and populate these with 10 objects. This one will have 20 and this one will have 10. And it's using the Bogus library with some configuration to actually go and populate the data for us. It will all be static and in memory. So every time you restart your API, it will actually provide you with different data. Don't freak out about that. It's just this data that we're using to drive the backend. It's the easiest way rather than having to connect to a database or whatever, right? So that's why we're following this approach. A real scenario will probably integrate with multiple different backends and data stores. So just so you're aware, this is just for testing purposes. So now that we have this helper method, this helper class, we need to add it to the middleware in here, services add singleton. So if we go back into our startup.cs, we need to add it into our startup.cs here. So let me close that one so everybody can have a better view. Just the last line. And this one will call our sample data, and we'll call the initialize method to populate the data. Let's save this one. And we need a controller now. And the controller will be the one that serves the data to our callers, who will return the appropriate data from the sample data that we have. So what we need to do now is copy that, and we need to go into the controller. So, and create a new one that is called categories controller.cs. And if you know about conventions in ASP.NET Core, as long as you have the controller in the name, it will try to find it. If you call that endpoint, it will try to serve that homonymous controller. Is that the right word? Or did I invent Greek words into English? Homonymous, right? Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm just making things up right now, and I need more coffee. Okay, so what is this whole controller doing? Let's have a look into here. So first of all, we have an authorize, which means that for you to be able to call this controller, you need to have, or endpoint, this API endpoint, which will be probably / categories. You need to have a valid access token. And further down here, we have a sample data object that will allow us to return data. And you'll notice that in the get all categories, we have a verify user has any accepted scope. And we talked about the scopes before. You'll notice here that we're hard coding the scopes, which is not ideal. Probably you'll have some constants or something in the config file that you can configure there. But for now, let's ignore the hard coding of the scopes. It is for testing after all. And ideally, you don't want them to be hard coded. And in effect, line 24 will check for the incoming access token. We have to be authorized already, but now we also are checking against the appropriate scopes. So if the calling request does not have the appropriate scopes, it will get a 403. And you notice that we do the same later on for the get category if we want to get a specific one. And for the create category, we have a category.write, which I think is the one that requires admin consent, if I remember correctly. So there you have it. This should be our API. I can't remember. So what else do we have? Products controller. Oh yeah, we need to add a products controller as well. Just not categories. Okay, so here, add a file, products controller.cs. And then in the very exact same manner, we have different API endpoints or different methods in our controller. One is for getting all the products, one is for getting a product by a specific ID, and one is for creating. And you'll notice that again, we expect the appropriate scopes to be passed in, so we can do that. A nice enhancement would be to use the custom attribute to handle the verify scope call. There is a custom attribute. There is indeed a custom attribute. You can use that. This workshop is probably slightly older than where our library is sitting right now. So you don't have to use this convention. You can actually do it via custom attributes. So we got you, Daryl Challenger. We got you there. We got your back, I mean. Okay, so we got the products controller as well. And this is all we need. So technically, we should be able to .NET run, and it should work. And let me see, have I saved everything? I have saved everything. There are no open files. We'll check that in a second. As far as I can tell, yeah, it's all saved. So first, let's confirm that everything is working. CLS, and then we do .NET build. Yeah, obviously it's not .NET, it's .NET. Ta-da! It's working. Well, although we checked that. There's an attribute available. Yep. Thank you, JP. Okay, so we have that one. Let's do some knowledge check. Let's test our knowledge. Developers can use Microsoft Identity to secure which types of applications? Web apps, desktops and mobile applications, web APIs, or all of the above can be secured with Microsoft Identity. And what types of authentication flows can developers use when securing a web API with Microsoft Identity? Only the on behalf of flow is supported by Microsoft Identity with web APIs. Only applications that access the web API as themselves, not as a user. And then both applications that access the web API without a user, like a console or a daemon app, and the on behalf of flow are supported. So let's check our answers. Okay, we passed. So we have our API working, and we've completed this second part of the module. So we're ready to move on. Calling secured APIs from web applications. So first and foremost, you need to create an app registration inside Azure AD to show intent that we're going to authenticate users and acquire tokens for our API. So that will be the first step here. Creating the app registration. Then we need to create a new MVC app. And here we're going to be using MVC instead of Razor Pages, but it's totally down to you which flow you want or which kind of model you want to use. So we have a question from Sidmo01. I don't know how to pronounce that. Sidmol, I suppose. So if you have a product.write permission, then you have for all products. If you wanted permissions for a subset of projects or projects owned by, say, a department, would you use access control lists, and how would you do that? Okay, so you would probably have, the way I would do it is you would probably have a separate scope and then a different endpoint in my API that only that department would be able to call. Or you could use roles. Yes, good point. Thank you, JP. Role-based access. So that would be the way.
Yeah, remember the a scope is really a way to say, I want to allow an application to do this on behalf of a user. So like, let's say, so what was this one? Products.write. Well, we may say from the mobile app, we don't even want to let the mobile app write any products. It's going to be read.only. Like that might be one. It's just read only. And so we say, well, we're not even going to make that scope available from the app, from that specific client. So what the user can do, the user themselves, be it a role that they may be a member of, or the certain data like an organization that they're a member of, or something else like that that defines what they can and can't have access to, that would be consistent regardless of the client they're using. So if they're using a mobile app or a web app or a JavaScript app or whatever, what they can do or what kind of data they have access to is independent of, okay, I'm using this specific application and I want this specific app to be able to access certain things in my data as this user.
Yep.
So the scopes are really helpful to restrict access from a specific kind of application as opposed to restricting what the user can do sort of all up. Roles and attributes on a user themselves tend to be a better fit for that kind of thing.
So a combination of scopes and roles will allow you to fine tune that, and also different app registrations as well. So as JP said, you wouldn't be using the same app registration for a single page app that you'll be using for a mobile app. So that's where you can also define different kind of behaviors as well, or permissions. So next we need to create the web app, and as I said, we're using an MVC. Now at the time that they probably wrote this workshop, they didn't have the template built in for Microsoft Identity Web. So as we will be creating this one, we don't have to add those extra packages in there because it will be part of the template. The .NET new MVC with auth will in effect do that for us. And then we need to update the web API to allow us also to go and acquire access tokens for the downstream APIs, i.e. our API in this instance. We call downstream. Some people said it should be upstream. Some people said, I don't get why it's called downstream or upstream. So just go with the naming convention. And you'll notice that right below that, we're using a token cache. The whole point there is that we don't want to go to Azure Active Directory every time we need to get a token, right, for accessing our API. So we need to cache it somewhere. And the nice thing about the Microsoft Identity Web is that it comes with built-in caching capabilities. Now, the in-memory one is the simplest one, but remember that every time your app restarts, you're going to lose your access tokens. So not ideal for horizontally scaling, and it's not ideal for scenarios where you might be starting continuously. So there are other versions of token caches available to you, including distributed token caches using Redis or things like Cosmos DB or SQL. In fact, anything that implements the iDistributed cache interface can be used for caching your access tokens as well. And then down here, we'll just add the UI, which should already be available. So a few lines of code to add. And then inside the new controllers that we'll create, we will use the iToken acquisition interface or we'll dependency inject a token acquisition object that will allow us to go and acquire a token for the user async. So in effect, in a single line of code, we'll say, go and get me an access token for this specific scope or scopes, and it will do it for us. Any questions so far before we jump on to writing the code? You can always catch up on the chat, so let us know. Right, okay, so let's write some code. This exercise assumes you have already created a secure API, which we have, so no need to go back. And we've done that part. So now we need to go and create our app registration. So let me put this on the side while we work on the two windows. I thought I put it on the side. I didn't. So there you go. And again, let's go and create a new app registration. So at the root, new registration. And that should be named Product Catalog Web App. Again, the name can be anything you want, but since we're following the example here, just stay consistent. Product Catalog Web App. Because later on there will be a product catalog console, if I remember correctly. Again, we want to use a single tenant, so only organizations in this, or accounts in this organization. Nothing else on this page for now, so let's press register. This will create our app registration. We have that information here, we'll grab it in a bit. So next, we want to go into authentication. And remember, we didn't do this for the API because there was no interaction, but now there will be user interaction, so we want to say what kind of platform they're going to use. And at this instance, because we're creating an ASP.NET MVC, it's going to be a web. The first thing it asks is the redirect URI. My browser just dumps random autocomplete stuff in there. It's just insane. It's like, why would that GUID make any sense? Anyway, HTTPS, localhost, and since we're running vanilla MVC, it's 5001 for the HTTP port, and then sign in DAS OIDC. And it's signing, not singing like I did last week, and I was scratching my head for 5 minutes why it was not working. So it's signing OIDC. And just to trigger my friend JP here, we're going to use the hybrid flow. He's like wavy, he said. Ideally, you don't want to use this one. We'll go with the example. It is possible to not use implicit flow or hybrid flow, whatever they call it. We don't agree with this one. Both me and JP are against using this flow because code flow is supported in ASP.NET Core and just 2 lines of configuration to change that. So just be aware that this is not perfect, and we'll be working with the team to improve the experience and not use implicit flow going forward. But for now, let's go with the flow. How about that? Okay, so make sure you press configure, please, because that will persist your changes. You don't need to do anything else here, but we need to go and create a client secret. So authentication is done. Now we need a client secret. I'm going to dox myself with this one, which is absolutely fine. I will be deleting this secret later on, so feel free to try to log into my account. So new secret, and I think it's going to be partially hidden here, but it won't be partially hidden in my app settings. So it's fine. 1 year only, please. Don't make it too long. You don't need a description. It's fine. It will create one for you, which is cool. Now you need to copy this one. Please make sure you copy, because if you come back, you won't be able to find it. You both have said that before. What is the config change to use if you don't want to have implicit flow? It's in the OpenID config settings in the configure services line. And don't remember it off the top of my head, but I think JP remembers, so we can show you what it is, but it won't persist in the code. So let me open Notepad. JP, do you remember it at the top of your head? Like services, OpenID something.
Services, sorry, services configure Microsoft Identity options of type Microsoft Identity options.
And then you have sales codes for the options.
And then the in the option, you'll have, it's called response type, and you can just write the word code as a string.
Yep.
Or there's a type you can use too, but
yeah, it's an enum, so you can use that.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. So there you have it. That's like 2 lines of code, or a single line of code, I suppose, because it's a lambda. Yeah, you can use to switch from implicit flow to code flow, and it's insane that it's not part of the template. It's an internal debate that we're having, so bear with us while we're advocating for the right way to do things. Oh, I don't know if it's a losing battle or not. JP is laughing. Okay, right. So we have the secret. Now we need to just go and create our app. So I'm going to open a new, that's why I love Terminal, right? Because Windows Terminal, if you don't use it, it's fantastic. I can have multiple tabs side by side. So on this instance, we're going to cd into projects again, because this is my playground. And we're going to go with, how many times am I going to dox myself with that secret? So copy, and then we'll say .NET new MVC --auth. Do you not love inconsistency? It could be just that. But it's the same thing, right? Just --auth, single org, and it will output everything into the product catalog web app. Let's do this. What? .NET new MVC author does not exist, so ignore my typos. This is just a me error, not a you error kind of thing. Okay, so our web app is created. cd into product web. Make sure you change that to the right one. Let's open it in code. Another code instance. How many code instances can we have in one window? So in here, I'm just going to pin it to the right. And we're going to put this on the left, or the other way around, left and right. Your left, not my left. And let's go, yes, please, change this. Now, very, very important. Let's make sure that we have the appropriate libraries in place. And as you can see here, we have both web and web UI. So you do not need to go and install separately those packages. And inside our app settings, we have our information again. So we need to go and configure these. So let's do that. We'll start with the top. cmatcast.onmicrosoft.com. Let's go and get our app settings. So we'll grab them and put them here, so we can easily do that. And let's grab the secret while we're here. So client secret. It's expected that to be in a very specific format. If you don't use that wording, then your Azure AD will break your configuration. Okay. So this, and then we have client ID, which we can grab from the overview. Let's put that there. Let me hide this. I know people always say that. Hide the file explorer. And then the tenant ID down here. So now the reason why we need to use a client secret here, even on the implicit flow, is because now if you're using code flow, you need to have a client secret regardless. But let's say if you were just using the implicit flow, which comes out of the box, you don't really need a client secret, right? But because we need to go and acquire access tokens, we need a client secret so we can authenticate against Azure AD. So therefore, we need a secret regardless. But ideally, you should be using the code flow and not with Pixie and not the implicit flow in our templates. Again, as I said, it's work in progress. Bear with us while we fix things. So we have the settings here, which is great. Let's see what we need to do next. Configure the API information. Oh yeah, okay. So we need to create a file called constants. Okay, so here, does it say put in a folder? In the root folder. Okay, good. In the root folder then, we're going to create a constants.cs. And then we're going to paste that information here. Now, the tricky bit is that we don't have the web API client ID, so we need to go and grab it. So let me save this and let me close that, and we'll go through these settings here. But for now, let's quickly jump into our app registration, and then in here I want to filter by created on, and that's the API, I guess. And in the expose APIs, we need to just go and grab that, and then back into our code. Here we want to replace this, so Control H and that, and then press the nice button up there, and we'll replace everything for us. What else do we have here? We have the endpoints. So the category URL will be where our local API will be running. Remember, we set the 50/50 as the port. Then we have the scopes that we need, and it's nice to not hard code as we did before in the code. We have a constants file that contains all that, or it could be in the app settings if you wanted to as well. And then when we say I want to get all my scopes, this in effect passes all the scopes in, and the Microsoft Identity web library is actually expecting things to be in a list or an array. Okay. And finally, for the claims, we're passing the information there. Okay. That's all we need. So we have that. Next, we need to go and see what the next step is. We need to add some code, I guess. So configure the web application middleware. Yes, we need to configure the middleware to allow us to grab the necessary information. So let's grab all that and back into our startup.cs. Close this one again, and let's update that here with what we discussed. So we have Alt-Shift-F. Interesting, it doesn't do the... That's definitely not what I wanted to do. Is my... Okay, so here, maybe one more. So we'll do one more. Alignment. Okay, so we have the authentication with Microsoft Identity Web. So that will do the authentication. It will get the user through the door. And then we say we also want to be able to acquire tokens for all the scopes that we talked about, a summary of the scopes. And then finally, let's put them in memory. Now, as I said, we have other caches as well. So dot distributed token cache, you have in memory, you have session. And for now, we'll go with the in memory, add in memory token caches. There you have it. Now we need to add a few controllers there so we can grab the information and display it nicely. So inside the models, let's add a new one. Do we have a models? We do have a models. Let's add a category.cs. Yes, Ahil, we're on a roll today, my friend. This is a workshop, right? So we continue doing that. And that Monday is probably the last Monday that we'll ever have on our schedule for... no changes. Remember how we moved everything to Tuesday? Unfortunately, we couldn't move everyone to Tuesday. So a couple of people had to remain on the Monday schedule. So that was why we did our stream with our very good friend, Julien, this morning on a Monday. I think that's the last Monday ever. Unless we decide to add more shows. But I don't think that's going to happen. So for now, it's Tuesdays and Fridays for dev staff and Wednesdays for IT pro staff on Microsoft Identity don't forget our Wednesday show. So we got our category here. We need to add a categories controller under the controllers. So let's go and do that. Categories controller, CS. And let's paste that here. Okie dokie. So we have that. And then we need to add a view. So remember, it's an MVC, model view controller. So now we need a view as well to display the information. So we need a controller. If I remember, it's categories folder here. It's using the convention that we have on ASP.NET. So we'll expect to find stuff under categories. And then in here, we need an index.cshtml, i.e. erasure page. Index.cshtml. And this is for the display purposes. We'll grab the data and then we'll display it to us. And then we have a new file as well called create. So copy that. Use categories, create. CSHTML. Let's paste that there. Done and done. So that is for the categories, and we need to do the same for the products. Because why not? So first we need to have a model. So let's go into models, create a product.cs. How else are we going to interact with our products? Then we need to have, you know what, I didn't save this one. Close this one, let me close this one and this one and this one. Then we need a product view model. So we have an extra model here, or view model if you want to call it, that takes both the product and the category and adds them together. So it's a very optimized object for our view in effect. So here I'm going to add a product view model.cs, and there we add the appropriate properties. I like that it's just copy paste. I can imagine having to type all that stuff. And then a products controller under controllers. So close this there, add products.controller.cs. Let's paste all that beautiness in there. And we just need a view now. Or do we need two views or just one view? Two views, I think. Okay, so views, categories. Now we need a products folder, products, and then under there we need an index.cshtml for displaying our products, and then we need a create one as well, following the paradigm of before. Create.cshtml, and save this one as well. Close. And now we need to go and start our API, right? So we have everything we need, just making sure we have our controllers, we have our models, and then we have our views, which correspond to our MVC framework. And then in our startup.cs, we have the necessary things wired up, so we can go and acquire our authenticate the users and then acquire the access token for the things that we need. Okay, so now let's start the app. So .NET run on our API, and we should make sure that it's listening on the port. It's not listening on port 5050, so stop this. And I think I know why. I don't think that the launch.cs overrides the so where's my API? This is not the API, so let's go to the API. So here we have properties launch settings.json. So in here, go and replace that with 5050, and that should solve the problem. So if I go back here and do .NET run, now it's listening to port 5050. That's very important, because if you were to run the web app right now, it would say, I cannot start because I can't bind. So here we have our API listening. It's running happily in the corner. And now we need to build and test the web app. So on another window, whether you have your, whether you're using terminal or not. So let's see, CLS, clean that. Let's do .NET build. Make sure that everything is building. We may have forgotten something or mistyped something. I hope not. Good. No messages. With this example, would this example work with HTTP instead of HTTPS? Yes, it would. You just need to make sure that all your URLs are configured to use the HTTP model. Now remember that HTTP with localhost HTTP is only supported with localhost. So from an Azure Active Directory perspective, you wouldn't be able to run on HTTP outside your developer environment. But because .NET is coming with a free developer certificate, you don't have to worry about using HTTP. In fact, I would encourage you to use HTTPS by default, right? And it makes your life a lot more easier and consistent. So if it's the first time that you're running your app or .NET, then you need to run this one first so you can trust the developer certs, especially if you are in VS Code. In Visual Studio, it will do it for you. But in VS Code, you don't do that, so we don't need to. I have already done it a million times before. And all I have to do is now is .NET run. And that's run on port 5001 because we're using HTTPS. And that's the one that we configured on a redirect URI. So I'm launching my app now. The first thing it asks me to do is sign in. I don't know if it's, oh, there you go. The consent framework kicks in. So now I have to consent to all these permissions. And I will say accept. I'm not consenting on behalf of my org. There's not much. What did I screw up? I screwed up my direct URI. So just let's make sure that I've copied the right things here. It wouldn't be a live stream if we didn't have errors, right? Let's go back into our Matskas, then go into the web app. It is the right one, so authentication. Maybe I didn't save that. Aha, it is Lokha, not local. So you can blame it on my lack of coffee or the fact that we've been streaming for 2.5 hours or 3 hours now. How about that? Okay, so now if I go back to my web app, let's sign in again. Aha. There you go. We are in. Now, what does it say here? What do we need to do? In the tutorial, it says we need to navigate to a specific endpoint. Yeah, we accepted the permissions, all good there. And then navigate to categories. So if I were to go here and do /, we don't have navigation up here, obviously. If you were building a proper app, you would have proper navigation up here, but we don't. We're hacking it for now, so categories. All information here. Remember, this will be very different every time you restart your API. So the data is not going to stay consistent, but we get our 10 categories. And now if I were to change to products, we see 20 products, if I remember correctly. Yep. So, and the category, right? So this is the product view model that we created, combining the information that we need. So there you have it. The first part of the exercise was to create a web API and then a web app that calls into that web API and acquires the appropriate access tokens from Azure AD in order to call the API for us. All working. So let's test our knowledge here. Which of the following best explains the on behalf of flow? Using its credentials and the currently signed in user's access token, an API obtains a new access token to call a secured API. Using the credentials of the currently signed in user and the app's credentials, an app obtains a new access token to call a secure API. Or an app uses the currently signed in user's access token to call a secured API. I'll let you simmer a little bit on that one before I answer. And then this next one is, which is the correct way to reference custom scopes, such as product or read, when including them in an access token request? The first one is API, then the client ID, then / product.read. The other one is directly product.read, and then finally API : / product.read. Here. And check your answers. Hope everybody got that right. If not, it provides nice explanations why you missed it. So let's continue. Calling secure APIs. Although, you know what? I think it's at the top of the hour, so this might be a good time to take a 5-minute break